Alright, hey y'all, welcome back to All Cars. It is time for another reaction video to a Motorweek Retro review. This is the 1985 Mercury Topaz, an extra special car from the end of the Malaise era. And look, I've got a couple stories about this. My family never had one. I have ridden in multiple versions of this, certainly the Ford Tempo. I have driven multiple versions of this back in the day, and I've always kind of liked this car. I think it's a little beat up in terms of it was the car to me. It was one of the cars that really showed dramatically the difference between what the Japanese and the Americans were doing. The Tempo and the Topaz, they always felt thick and heavy and slow responses, and their interiors tended to disintegrate, in my humble opinion. And I like them, honestly, because I honestly thought they were pretty comfortable. I thought they were fairly priced. I thought they were okay cars. Not great, I just thought they were okay. And two things I remember about them specifically, I think it was Car and Driver. They had one that they were being sent to test, and they made a comment in the article about how people think that the reason they like so many cars is because the manufacturers send to them the pristine, perfect versions, and the one they got actually had two different front seats in it. So that was number one. And the second thing is, and bear with me while I tell you this story, is back when I was in my preteen years, right, my formative hormonal years, we went to California, flew into LAX and rented a car, went to Alvera Street for some food, and then we're driving north and managed to get caught in rush hour traffic. And what we rented was a Ford Tempo. I'll never forget. And I was in the back seat of it, bumper to bumper traffic. Now keep in mind, at the time I lived outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. I mean, the Bible Belt Buckle, very, very socially conservative area of the country. And we're sitting in traffic, and I looked over, and I will never forget, there is a red Mustang convertible with a bleached blonde hair, and she had 3 earrings in her ear. Bottom, middle, and top. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen up to that point, and she personified, for young me, she personified sexy for many, many years. And that was thanks to a Ford Tempo, which of course related here to the Mercury Topaz. So let's jump in and see what Motorweek thinks about it. I bet their story isn't as good as mine.
Made possible by Lucas Oil and TireRack.com.
Now, 2 years ago, Ford introduced its mid-size front-drive Ford Tempo and Mercury Topaz. And while they were fine family cars, the first ones didn't exactly set our performance hearts aflutter. The ride was too soft for serious cornering, and the engine, well, it was only adequate. But Ford may have remedied that with their new Sports Group. It's a package designed to put a little more zing into their smallest streamlined twins. Right off, we have to say that Ford still wants this Topaz to be a family car, not a boulevard racer, even with the Sports Performance Group, or as Mercury calls it, the Topaz GS Sports Group. Market research shows that a lot of customers would buy a car with better than normal handling and acceleration, as long as they didn't have to sacrifice a smooth ride and good fuel economy. Well, that's the mission of this Mercury Topaz with its higher performance components. The basis for its upgrading was already in place, thanks to the original design of the Topaz's unitized body and all-independent strut and coil spring suspension. And with the Sports Group, you get increased shock absorber damping rates. Our car also had the additional tweaking that goes with the optional TRX tires.
I'm going to interrupt there because they didn't really give me a good place to pause at the beginning. The styling on these things was always okay. You know, you can see the evolution of Ford styling into what became the Sable and the Taurus, you know, the swoopy styling. This ends up looking more like a bar of soap left in the sun, and it's a little awkward. I mean, you gotta keep in mind it was 1985. but it still was just okay. Like it looks narrow at the front especially, and for some reason the headlights are set back, the grille sticks out. It looks a little awkward. The proportions look a little awkward. I really don't like the two-door version. And everywhere it just kind of looks soft, and that's my opinion of the car. Is like they said, it didn't really handle, it didn't really have any acceleration. Ford really needed to invest in some engines here and transmissions. And then inside, I seem to remember the seats just being soft. Everything was soft, but I always thought it was relatively handsome, and I liked the rear end on it. I thought it was always pretty good. I hated these wheels. Okay. Come on. In one direction they look like a plus, in the next direction they look like a cross, and you can never get them all lined up. This is a terrible design for people who have any kind of OCD at all.
The widest available on the Topaz. Small changes, but big improvements. Cornering is better with much less body roll. There's now a good balance between the mild scrubbing of the front tires and the ability to steer the rear wheels with the throttle. We won't call this Topaz tossable, but it's getting close. The rack and pinion steering is quite quick and has plenty of feel, except when the steering wheel is centered during rapid maneuvers. Probably another case of power steering pump lag. But did Ford manage to maintain the ride? Yep.
Well, let me tell you right now, just look at this thing straight on. I saw it when they were doing the slalom there. Does that not look like a Plymouth Sundance from straight on? And I also like the fact that you've got the square openings around the headlights, and then the grill, the grill kind of narrows up right there, almost reminiscent of would that be the Mark I Cortina over in the UK? I think so, or it was at the Escort. Forgive me, I don't remember. But little reminiscent of what they were doing in the UK over on the continent, but also looks for all the world like a Plymouth Sundance to me.
On the open road, it's only a bit harder than before. It takes a really fat expansion joint before too much of a jolt reaches the passenger compartment. But even so, you feel rather than hear it because of a low 55-mile-an-hour sound level of only 68 decibels. We wonder, though, why Ford didn't use their gas struts to get an even better ride and handling combination. The second major item of the Sports Performance Group is a new high-output version of the 2.3-liter pushrod 4 that debuted in the Topaz. Now, with throttle body fuel injection, the standard engine gets 5 more horsepower at 89. The high-output version is rated at 101 horsepower. Those extra horses come from higher air and fuel flow rates, better engine breathing from larger intake ports and valves, a hotter cam, and a less restrictive exhaust system.
I want to jump in here. So the base engine has like 89 horsepower. Nothing to be exciting about from over 2 liters. And did they say that engine was introduced? I mean, was this a brand new design they introduced in the Tempo and the Topaz? That means that Ford in the early 80s was designing a brand new pushrod 4-cylinder. I need to go back and verify that. I guess that kind of jumps out at me, kind of surprises me. You know, a lot of stuff in the 80s, the American manufacturers, they could hit the numbers. I talked about this repeatedly. They could do the 0 to 60. They could make it quiet, but they missed the point. And there was a lot of times, especially I was thinking more in the late 80s, early 90s, where they were doing the numbers, but they just seemed like they were doing it so low tech. They had totally lost the cool factor to the Japanese. And this would be a great example. You design a brand new engine from the ground up and you just make it a pushrod when everybody else is going to be moved to overhead cams. A little disappointing, honestly, and I know why they did it. They probably did it because they could make a pushrod, they could make it reliable, and all of their service techs would be familiar with the technology, but just a little disappointing. I need to look that up.
That lowers 0 to 60 times by 1.4 seconds. They're now 12.6. Passing is also a breeze with a very quick 3.9 second 40 to 55 third gear sprint.
You know, all I can say is that 0 to 60 time is unexciting. That's the answer. It's just okay. That tells you. I think that tells you what you need to know about the car. Is the GS version is still, it's getting there.
Quarter mile is also quick, 17.7 seconds at 72 miles per hour. But the engine still makes most of its power at low RPMs, though it was more willing than the engine in our last Topaz tester. While the clutch still feels like an on-off switch, the shift linkage for the standard 5-speed manual is smoother than before. It has the familiar long throws, but it isn't notchy or vague. It's not world-class, but the Topaz shifter is the best in front-drive America. But is fuel economy intact? Well, EPA ratings are 22 city and 31 highway. We echoed the higher number, 31 on our 100-mile economy loop. Impressive. But some things on the Topaz Sport still need work, such as brakes. While stops from 55 took a short 124 feet, the pedal was mushy and the rear wheels did a lot of hopping as the front disc locked up before the rear drums. The brakes faded more than expected too, but halts were straight if a little smelly. The sports group also adds some distinctions to the Topaz's somewhat bulbous mini T-Bird Aero body style. Almost all chrome is gone. Thankfully, there wasn't much to begin with, replaced by charcoal accents and contrasting stripes on the body bumper strip. The sports group is also available on the four-door body style.
Yeah, I never thought about it as a mini T-Bird style, but yeah, I can see it now that they say it. And almost everything there so far, talking about the engine, the transmission being good in America, but not world class, the acceleration, the stopping, but the brake pedal's mushy, all of that, just, you end up with a strong sense of what this car is. It's just adequate at everything. It's not exceptional at anything. And even the platform here looks old, like the wheelbase with the overhangs they've got. It just looks like an older platform that had been updated, although it's not. And you know, this is what kills me is in the 80s they came out with a car that was adequate. It showed a lot of improvement over what they had before, but you know it was overshadowed by almost anything the Japanese were making. And it's because it feels like they didn't sweat the details. They didn't go that extra mile on every single thing. They reached a point of good enough and then just kind of let it ride, and you ended up with a car that I don't necessarily think it was terrible, but utterly forgettable.
Inside, things are also demure, with all-cloth performance seats that were very comfortable but did lack some lower back support. Interior room in the Topaz is good, especially for heads and shoulders, although tall front seat occupants could use a bit more seat travel for leg room. The Topaz dash has been reworked this year, with the passenger side pushed back for a more open feeling. A useful dash top shelf has been added too, and side window demisters are now standard. The instruments have new graphics and a very clear arrangement. But as in many German cars, both an oil pressure gauge and voltmeter are missing. Rear seat room in the Topaz is better than you'd expect for this size car, although we do wish the front seats would automatically move forward when tilted so rear seat passengers could get in more easily.
Yeah, and again, that just is another, you know, they didn't really sweat the details. Why not, if you're trying to get in the back seat, flip a lever and it folds and slides? Why not? You know, it's so frustrating. And the dash is okay. I mean, for 1985, that's not bad. Some good thinking in there. It's kind of got the pod, but it, you know, it looked like they didn't really focus on it. The HVAC was mounted vertically. That's a nice use of space, and still very typical 80s, even into the 90s. The radio's sitting down there on the floor, but a relatively basic but not offensive interior. I like the shelf in front of the passenger, but it was okay.
Now, we only mention these details because Ford is obviously working very hard to improve on an already fine car line. And our two-door Topaz GS cost only $9,839. That includes $900 for the sports group, so its price won't break you either. So this Mercury Topaz Sport is a good college try at making a family series even better. We like it, but we can't help hoping that it's only an interim step in the evolution of this Merc and its sister, the Ford Tempo. Honest cars that are becoming much more appealing.
You know, okay. It's all right. It's a little underwhelming. Honestly, I wish they had more, and I can't quite figure out when Motorweek does here's 2 other vehicles you would compare this to, and when they don't. But it's okay. You know, and I think that comes across with almost everything they say. You know, the ride, the handling, the acceleration, the feel of everything. The seats are good, but lack a little support. Everything was just okay. That was a really short one. Most of theirs go over 7 minutes at least, and that was 6 minutes. They didn't really spend any time on the interior, showing people getting in and out and everything else. And so I think that tells you what you need to know. This is a kind of meh car that sold pretty well, but never, I think, stood up to what the imports were moving to, and the speed at which they were moving and developing their cars in the 80s. It'd be fun to go back and drive one of these again, because my overwhelming memory was slow. You press on the gas and it accelerated lazily. It shifted lazily, and that it probably wasn't a GS version by any stretch, and that all of the movements were lazy. That had this sense of weight about it, same as the Escort used to. Even if it tested pretty well, it just ended up feeling like you were sitting in a bathtub covered in cloth and just kind of going through the motions. So a little underwhelming, but that was a little fun trip down memory lane. So I hope you appreciate it. Please leave me a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. And if you haven't, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks, guys.